Hi, my name is Greg Poole, head of the Knowledge Network here at UBS. And today it's my privilege to host this session with Avi Hasson on innovation. We are, of course, celebrating Jewish American heritage, and I want to take this time to thank the MOSAIC team, including Dumi Kapanya, Raquel Small, Andrea Hanna, and Elliot Blake. By way of introduction, and I will by no means do this justice, Avi is currently the CEO of Startup Nation Central. Before being CEO of Startup Nation, Avi was the chief scientist of the Ministry of the Economy for the State of Israel from 2011 through 2017, as well as having a 10-year stint with the Gemini Israeli Funds, serving as general partner. You also had multiple roles in the telecom industry in product marketing and business development. So we intend to explore all of that in our next hour. And for the audience, for a framework, we're going to have three phases. I want to discuss your approach, what you and the team have accomplished, and what you attribute that success to. And then, of course, a call to action from the UBS side, how can we help? And then, of course, we'd love to make sure that we take questions from the audience. And the good news is we already have some. So now, Avi, when we first met, you used a phrase that's actually stuck with me. I've actually been talking to my kids about it. You said impatient innovation. Could I ask, what does impatient mean to you? And how has that shaped really who you are in your process? And just as an aside, I really also loved unreasonably optimistic. Avi, to you on impatient innovation.
So thank you, Greg. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, I guess. And thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, actually, which is innovation. And I think it's rightful to know that when you try to look on the unique characteristics of Israeli innovation, one of them really comes across in what indeed I love to call impatient innovation. Now, I know patience is a virtue, so impatience is not necessarily considered a good word. And Israelis, to be frank, are notoriously an impatient bunch of people. That has a reason, by the way. We live in a country that never had the luxury of space or time or security, and that kind of instills a sense of urgency, which what we found out is actually quite positive when you think about innovation. Now, I think everyone, by the way, in the world is growing restless because we see the complex challenges that we all need to deal with. And we also see governments and large companies sometimes failing to meet those challenges. It's clear that innovation can play a big role in solving a lot of these problems, but it's sometimes taken back by hierarchy, by being process-oriented, by being risk-averse. This is really what you try to see about some of the unique characteristics of Israeli innovation. Maybe we can later give examples or talk about the origins of that. It's actually quite the opposite. So impatient means that you don't wait for full certainty before jumping into action. You don't wait for the green light. You have a healthy disregard for protocol, a healthy disregard for hierarchy. Now, I would just say Intel, as one example, is one of the 450 companies that have built innovation centers in Israel. Intel specifically is manufacturing semiconductors, chips in Israel. You have to be very patient and follow protocols to do that. But even when you do that, you find out that Israelis have a different way performing their tasks. They're more audacious. They're more meritocratic. They focus on the result. As I've said, they don't wait for full certainty. And my claim is, and this is based on 30 years of experience, is that actually the world needs a dose of that. And I'm a big, big believer in collaboration. So I always think it's about joining forces and really bringing the best of different ecosystems. But what Israeli innovators can offer, and it's no surprise that we're calling the startup nation, is really that. It's what innovators want: solutions fast. They want to change the world. They want to make impact. And even our most basic scientists within the universities have that impatience ingrained into them. So that's maybe a better explanation what I mean when I speak about one of the characteristics of Israeli innovation being impatient in nature.
Great. Thank you for that. So I certainly love the don't wait for certainty, and I want to pull on your 30 years of history and ask you to walk through maybe some of the history of innovation in Israel. And as chief scientist for the Ministry of the Economy, right, you would have had that ringside seat. And then also just a fascinating stat for the audience. I think there are 135 companies listed on the NASDAQ that have their home headquarter in Israel. That would be the fourth most after the United States, Canada, China. So really, I guess the question is, where did it start? Why has it flourished? You alluded to it a little bit, but if you could provide some more color, please.
Well, absolutely. So again, as you stated, maybe first of all, just getting the credentials of why are we really talking about that, because Israel really is a very unique story. When you look into the hubs of innovation that are out there, and we'll talk about the journey, right? I sometimes joke that it took us 30 years to become an instant success. It was a journey. But when you look in what Israel can offer, now it's a small-sized country, less than 10 million people. It's away from any large market. It has a lot of challenges, obviously. It didn't have any natural resources. And up until not so long ago, certainly in historic terms, let's say 30 years ago, it was a socialistic country, a very centralized government, very closed economy, certainly not based on high tech. And yet when you look into where we are today, you see, I would claim, probably the best example of a knowledge economy. You mentioned the companies listed on NASDAQ. Just very, very quickly, maybe share with our audience some other numbers. About 18% of Israel's GDP comes from high tech. That's the share of the US, that's 3 times the share of the EU. About 13% of the workforce are employed in the high-tech industry. Half of our exports come from high-tech. 30% of our income taxes. We spend more than any other country worldwide on research and development, about 6% of our GDP annually. And this excludes our spending on defense R&D. And this goes on and on. Availability of talent, number of startups, venture capital, and so on. So how do we build, I think, an impressive ecosystem? And the question comes to, how did we do that? So we were talking about the impatience, and we'll mention some of the other culture-related characteristics, which are very important. But I do want to say, I'm sure some of the listeners know the word chutzpah, which is, by the way, is a legitimate English word these days, part of the dictionary, but it's very hard to translate. Some combination of boldness and arrogance. It's looking at the picture of Elon Musk on the cover of Time magazine and saying, hey, I can do twice as good as this guy. And then actually going out there and doing it. So Israelis had chutzpah in the 1950s as well, but there was no high tech in Israel at that time. But what we had even back then, before we had Startup Nation, we had Problem-Solving Nation. And the country had a lot of challenges to deal with. How do you defend the people? How do you feed them? How do you house them? How do you heal them? And it was clear that technology, research, science, and innovation are playing a very significant role in that. So some of our leading universities, like the Technion and Hebrew U, were built 100 years ago. That, again, for the people less knowledgeable about the history of modern Israel, is about 30 years before the establishment of the modern state of Israel. It was needed then because we needed scientists and innovators to give us solutions that will supply water for the country, that will help grow agriculture in a very, very challenging terrain, mostly desert, combination of swamps. As I said, almost no water. So science was needed. And that was the beginning. So for decades, this is what existed in Israel. Utilizing the strengths of science, technology, and innovation, defend the country, to feed the country, and so on. But then again, in the 1980s, really a unique combination has happened. We don't have it. It's a one-week workshop, which I don't want to bore the audience with, but really a combination of events that basically started like many other good stories with a horrible crisis. So basically, the country went bankrupt around 1984. People talk about high inflation these days. We had 500% inflation at that time. And it was clear that a lot needed to change. And part of that was opening Israel to the global economy, a massive privatization, and an establishment of a simple law called the R&D law that also created the Office of the Chief Scientist. So government understands that we want to build a knowledge economy, and it understood from the very beginning that it cannot do it alone. And if I really need to choose only one, it's not one word, a true word, but one term which is set in the heart of that Israeli policy is public-private partnership. And from the very early beginning, there was a very, very efficient work of taking the private sector strength combined with very smart policies and putting them into work. What has happened through that, and again, I'm doing it very quickly, but remember, this is the late 80s and early 90s, so it's the rise of the technologies of the former innovation cycle, not AI and quantum yet, but the internet, mobile technologies, the beginning of social and so on. We had a massive immigration of people coming to Israel from the former Soviet Union, which gave us an infusion of highly skilled employees, engineers, and technicians. The combination of all of that, the creation of venture capital and industry was really what started out what we see today. Now that set on two very important things, which was skills. We had very good scientists and researchers and entrepreneurs, and culture. And we've already talked about that impatient innovation part, which really waited for that commercial impact. So what has happened at that time is really taking the power of innovation and putting it into use to get commercial and economic benefit. That was the big change. Now, we'll just mention maybe last point, and then happy to take more questions. When we look at our universities, and we're very proud of their scientific prowess, but it's interesting to note, and not a lot of people know that, a lot of the universities today have what is called technology transfer offices. These are the units within the universities, like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, of course, that are in charge of taking the fruits of the research, sometimes basic research, and then commercializing it through licensing, joint research, and so on. Two of the three most oldest technology transfer companies in the world are from Israel, the Weizmann Institute and the Hebrew University. So we started this game a long time ago. This goes back to the 50s, and as I said, we've been doing innovation policies and innovation ecosystem building for almost 4 decades. The result of that is what we see today, a very sophisticated ecosystem which has all the financial capital elements and the human capital elements which are needed to have a fountain of innovation that continues to grow.
Cool. Thank you for that. So there we just covered a little bit of the how and the why. So I'd like to do a little bit more on the where. Obviously, through your organization, right, you tend to be outside of cyber and military. But what are the various tech subsectors that you play the most in, experience the most in, and maybe what technologies were actually invented in Israel?
Well, so the list is so long, again, when I talk about the ecosystem, actually one of the characteristics of the ecosystem is its very, very strong agility and diversity. So unlike other hubs of innovation, we could think of cities in the US or other places which are known for one vertical, automotive, pharmaceutical, defense, and so on. Israel, from the very beginning, has had a very diversified sector. I'll give you one example. We'll obviously talk about cybersecurity. Israel is well known as a cybersecurity powerhouse, and rightfully so. About 40%, 40% of the global cybersecurity investments is in Israeli cybersecurity companies. Just in the past few weeks, we've seen Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, Zscaler, and the likes spending billions of dollars acquiring Israeli startup companies. 13 of the last 14 acquisition in cybersecurity, over $100 million, were of Israeli companies. So really, we are super strong in that. But there are 3 times more health tech startups in Israel than cybersecurity startups in Israel. There are twice as more climate technology startups in Israel than cybersecurity startups in Israel. So one of the things that Israelis do very well is sometimes take the same underlying technology, which might have been developed for one use, and then putting it into action to solve a different problem. Once exposed to the challenge, to the problem, to the gap, Israelis have proved to be very efficient in taking that into other places. So certainly defense and cybersecurity are two areas where Israel is very strong, and our compulsory military service is also a big part of that. And we've built our leading position in the world. But as I've said, over the years, we've added some more. Automotive is an example that comes into place. I'm mentioning that because Israel has no legacy in automotive manufacturing. We never had, manufacturing plants of the sort. It doesn't fit, neither our culture nor the necessary infrastructure elements. And yet, when you look today, you would find in Israel all the major car manufacturers with significant strategic R&D centers in Israel. GM has over 1,000 people doing development in Israel, and so does Ford, Nissan, Hyundai, Mercedes, and also Continental and Bosch, the tier one vendors. And you'll find hundreds of Israeli startups, and you would find category leaders like Mobileye, which is leading the world by itself. So once a startup, but of course now a very, very large multinational company, started from the Hebrew University and employing thousands of people in Israel. Why is that? It happened because the car went through a major strategic change. It became connected and digital and autonomous. And while we know very little about the engine and construction of cars, we know a lot about sensors and image processing and security and communication. And all of that knowledge became very, very critical to the most cutting edge developments of the car, which is why Israel became all of a sudden a powerhouse in automotive. And the same you would find in AI, in health, right? There are about 500 startups in Israel doing digital health, AI-related health solutions, leveraging the capabilities that exist in artificial intelligence in Israel and putting them to use to the most pressing challenges of the world. So these are maybe a few examples, but then of course the list goes on and on. Maybe last one, the food technologies and specifically alternative protein, plant-based meats, cultured meats, a replacement for dairy, and so on. Israel is second only to the United States in terms of the number of companies and funding going into that specific sector. Before, every country in Europe, which is obviously a powerhouse in food technology. Again, many of these solutions and companies are multidisciplinary. They combine multiple technologies, multiple know-hows to create those solutions that are really aimed to solve some of the world's biggest challenges.
So that actually transitions pretty nicely. I want to bring three themes that you've talked about and then ask you about solving complex social issues, right? So you talked about your ability and the nation's ability to take strength in one area, apply it to another. You talked about the relationship between public and private working together on innovation. And then third, just this culture of innovation. So where have you used Israeli tech to help solve complex social issues? You mentioned water earlier, so I'm curious about that, if that all comes together.
Absolutely. So let's take the water example and then maybe try to derive from that general aspect. So for everyone growing in my generation in Israel, by the way, water scarcity was a big issue. Water was always a big issue in Israel simply because we live in an area which is mostly a desert. And by the way, even back in the 1950s, Israel embarked on a super ambitious project at the time that took water from the Sea of Galilee and really, transported it to all the parts of the country, specifically the southern part of the country, really to make sure we have agriculture there. If you look at Israel today, we are a water exporting country. We export water to some of our neighbors like Jordan and others. How did we do that? We did that by developing and leading major technologies. I'll mention only three of them. The first one is water desalination. And the majority of the water that we consume in Israel is desalinated. This is technology researched and developed in Israel, but also scaled up in Israel, and for longer than you would expect, the largest desalination plant in Israel, in the world, was in Israel. So we have multiple desalination plants, and that was a big part of the solution. The other part was water reuse or recycle. We recycle over 85% of our water. So again, making out of every drop of water, basically two. And the third one will be really drip irrigation technologies that were developed in Israel by a company called Netafim, grown in 20 different kibbutzim, which is basically used today also to grow rice, right? Think about it. We think about rice field. It's like flooded with water. But there are places in the world which grow rice by using drip irrigation, which is much more efficient and much more sustainable, right? So sometimes a lot of the things that started out of a necessity are today repositioned as the climate technology came to for sustainability and for a more efficient use of resources. So that's a great example of how really technology helped us solve a national problem, but also became a major export and economic sector for us. One of the things that really comes across, and you hinted at that, and the Global Innovation Index even has a name for that. They call it innovation linkages. When they look at the ecosystem, they try to measure how strong are the linkages between the different discrete components of the ecosystem. Do academia and industry work together? Does the government and the private sector interact together? The hospitals, medical doctors work with the technologies that can build the solutions to for the unmet clinical needs and so on. And Israel ranks there number one. And the reasons are the size. We are about the size of New Jersey, again, for people maybe less knowledgeable about the geography, and also the culture. The fact that everything is so accessible. We're a single degree of separation country. Basically, everybody knows each other, and it's very easy once you have that idea to find the people who will work with you, fund it, research it, market it, and then create a working solution out of that. That's a very important component of what we are. You add to that a third component, which from the very early days, the Israeli ecosystem was tightly coupled with the global value chain. Again, starting out of necessity. We don't have a local market. It's very, very small and sometimes Hebrew speaking and therefore not really relevant. Funding to date, 90% of the funding Israeli startup firms and venture capital firms in Israel is foreign capital. So markets, partners, this all creates something which is very global in nature. So when Israelis build the companies from the get-go, they think about the global problems. They think about the most complex challenges out there, and they try to set up the solutions for them. Now you add to that the 450 multinational companies that have set shop in Israel. I mentioned Intel with over 12,000 people, but NVIDIA, the darling of the markets. I hope all our listeners invested in time. Has over 4,000 people in Israel. Just this week, just the past week, spent $1 billion acquiring two, not one, but two startups in the AI sector in Israel, complementing their already very large R&D center in Israel. The presence of that multinationals by itself create that exposure to understanding what are the biggest problems that we're facing. And I think if we look on the challenges of ourselves as humanity, both as individuals, but also as society, biggest challenges of our times, right? We saw COVID as a clear reminder of that. We see the impact of climate change and the need to both mitigate and adapt to what is coming ahead of us. We see food security becoming a major issue. We see defense again arising as a troubling issue throughout the world, in Europe and Asia. and the US, and certainly the Middle East, all of these solutions require innovation. And I think, obviously, Israel, by the way, is not the only place where you can find innovation. Of course not. I wouldn't be as arrogant to think that. But I think the specific type of innovation that is found there, and most importantly, collaborating with that a type of innovation is something that is required by the world. And part of the reason I'm so positive about that is that at Startup Nation Central, and we're a not-for-profit organization, we host every year hundred of such solution seekers, multinational companies, government, civil society players, and investors, which really, of course, are also want to be part of that, coming to Israel, wanting to engage with that ecosystem, many times not necessarily finding a priori the solutions for the problems, but once exposing the gap, the challenge, the problem, talent is here and the will is here really to start creating the solutions for whatever is that need.
That's interesting. So for the audience, we're starting to see some questions come in, which I'll get to in a second. I just want to maybe sidetrack, pulling from your 30 years experience and maybe a little bit more of a personal question in terms of innovation, but the failure that oftentimes comes along with that. Could you just give an example of maybe a learning experience along the way, like you messed something up or you started off on one path and maybe you wound up on another? I just want to maybe gather from some of your insight, your history about like either how to fail faster, making a decision when you're not certain, like how did you know when to pivot? Basically, what did you learn from your mistakes?
So, yeah, I honestly, I think I love failures. When I was an investor, the second best thing after investing in a successful entrepreneur is investing in a failing entrepreneur, as long as you're sure that she or he have learned from their mistakes and are willing to go out there again. And, being the startup nation, it's all about that. It really is all about pivoting, about identifying the opportunities in the market, about understanding that the market has moved and needing to restart your company again and again. By the way, when you're competing with Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and the likes, and many times your market could go away simply by a decision of those companies. So you need to be able to make those changes, or sometimes, by the way, do exactly the opposite. I'm thinking of a company called Mellanox, which my firm, my one of my former venture capital was an early stage investor. Mellanox was a company that later became the core of NVIDIA's AI Center of Excellence here. It was acquired for $7 billion as a public company. But that was, based on a decision to keep focusing on a specific, again, I don't want to bore the audience, specific standard that at the time for many years seemed like it's a losing game because a different standard kind of came into play. But when AI emerged and when the needs for high performance computing and data center became, all of a sudden that technology became a key component of making it happen at such. And there are so many other examples. Again, I was the first investor in a company called PrimeSense, which maybe not a lot of the people in the audience recognize, but I'm sure many of you use every day Face ID in your iPhone. And maybe some of you gamers, folks, they remember the Kinect platform of the Xbox game console that enabled gesture, motion control, basically. This was all based on the technology of that specific company, which had many different applications. We remember those. But that basic capability, has been used in, therapeutic applications, in safety and control, and ended up being acquired again. And these are all examples of acquisitions by Apple. And becoming, again, part of their actually first R&D center outside of Cupertino, outside of Silicon Valley at the time. So I think, failing fast is a great advice. And I think, every startup entrepreneur should know that. The problem is, how do you really know when you should be persistent, which is equally important because you actually got it right and you just have to wait for the right market timing. And when you just have to say, well, let's move to a better idea. Let's utilize the talent and the financial capital that we have and really target a better problem. If it was easy, I guess, your wealth management advisors will be less required as such.
Yeah. Perfect. So we've got a bunch of questions that have come in from the audience, Avi. So there isn't going to be necessarily a theme, but they'll be a little bit scattered. So maybe a bit more technical, but how have the Abraham Accords signed in 2020 helped the development of the Israeli tech industry?
Thank you for that question. So, Abraham Accords, again, for people less knowledgeable, agreements signed, driven very much by United States activity between Israel and of active third countries in the Middle East and Africa, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. And this was really a major event. And I'm putting aside, not because they're not important, they're super important, the geopolitical, strategic elements of the agreement. But if I just look on my world, all of a sudden, almost overnight, it opened up economic and innovation-related collaboration opportunities that weren't there, which is exactly, by the way, why at Startup Nation Central, immediately after the Accords, or just between us even prior to the Accords, we were deeply involved in forging and creating innovation-related collaborations and relationships with all of these countries. For Israel, it opened up new markets. It opened up new partners. It opened up new sources of capital. It opened up new paradigms that we could learn from, and also we could share our experience with. And again, I think it's a prime example of what we've been doing with many other countries before. Look, I don't know if that will come as a question, but a lot of the people, throughout my career always ask, what is the recipe? Give us the recipe for Startup Nation. And I always tell that, it's equal to drinking an amazing wine in your vacation in France or Italy or Spain, I don't want to offend, or Australia or California. And then coming back and saying, hey, I want to make the same wine here. You're not going to be able to make the same wine. There are terroir-related elements, climate, soil, and so on, that you cannot replicate. But if you learn the best practices, the winemaking techniques, and so on, you can actually make a very good wine in your home country. It will be a different wine. It will not be the same. And this is the point I'm always stressing, right? So we're happy to share our best practices and to think, how can we work with other nations? And these are all countries who are eager to diversify their economies from being based on resources, mostly oil, to building knowledge economies. Yes, everybody wants to be Silicon Valley, but you cannot even think about becoming Silicon Valley. It's so different and unique. But when these countries look at Israel, they're saying, hey, here's a country not far away that 30 years ago was quite mediocre in terms of its innovation prowess. Let's try to learn from their knowledge. And we're eager to share that knowledge. And we think that we can also benefit a lot from that collaboration in multiple areas and sectors, from food security to climate to financial technologies to cybersecurity. So throughout, the past 3 years, trade with these countries has grown to be super significant. Trade with the UAE made them a top 10 or top 15 partner of Israel in, again, 3 years or so. And the potential is huge. So obviously, politics come in the way, but I know, because I've cultivated friendships and partnerships in all of these countries. There are long-term motivations that I believe will make this probably the most significant event of our era.
I was afraid you were going to start talking about this next question. So when you started talking about working with others, you mentioned AI, how important AI is as a part of innovation and innovation strategy, but equally the calls for regulation. Where does Israel come down on that? Where do you come down on regulation? How does that stack up in the region? Yeah, AI and regulation.
So first of all, I think it's a super important question. While I believe, and I've been saying that truly for a decade, that AI is the utility technology of our time, and it's going to, again, no need, you don't need me for saying that today, because I think it's a well-known fact. Another well-known fact, you know, not surprising and definitely not positive, is that regulation by definition always lags behind technology. And when we see an explosive autonomous technology like AI, it doesn't stand a chance. This is in general, not just in Israel. It doesn't mean that we don't need to try. And by the way, regulation is just part of the containment effort. We shouldn't only rely on our government to make sure that we have the safety, the ethic elements, and so on of AI mitigated. I don't want to say resolved, but at least mitigated. To answer that specific question, we're a laggard. If you look at the regulation, and in general, I would say, so when again, not me, when Israel is ranked in terms of its AI strength, it's very, very high there, but it's very, very high because of its researchers, startups, and so on. It lags when it comes to national strategies, infrastructure, and the regulation, all the things which are government-driven. So we are definitely behind. There are new legislation in place. They're not as advanced, let's say, or rigorous, pick your choice, as the European ones, but they're pretty much follow the best practices out there. As I've said, a lot of the AI taking place in Israel is actually happening under the logos of Google, Meta, Amazon, Oracle, Microsoft, and the likes. As such, of course, it's not just bounded by Israeli regulation, but also impacted by global regulation. But just to sum up, huge challenge, and we really have to step up to it, not just government, but also all the different players in that marketplace.
Avi, we've got a couple hundred people on the line, and we talk to an awful lot of clients, right? So how can UBS and our clients help Startup Nation? Is there the ability to partner?
So first of all, I truly believe, and this is not a sales pitch. I think it's not just about helping Startup Nation. I honestly think that anyone in the business of innovation, and yes, I would claim that everyone should be in the business of innovation, because that, as I said, holds the solution to many of our problems, but definitely has generated a lot of financial wealth over the years, has to have at least part of its strategy in Israel. The opportunity on different perspectives, from becoming a limited partner in an Israeli venture firm, or a direct investor as an angel family office, or a venture capital on its own, Israel presents amazing opportunities that are out there. Now, I think what has happened not just in Israel, but actually in every hub, but Israel is not an exception. I'll share with you that I've heard from some of the most sophisticated investors in the world that I speak with very often. In 2021, we actually stayed out of Israel. And just again, sharing in 2021, Israeli startups raised almost $30 billion in a single year. So what those investors are saying, actually at that time, we stayed away from Israel. Too pricey, too competitive, crazy. There was no due diligence. We all remember that, a crazy party. But right now, we're actually doubling down on Israel, because the fundamentals are still very strong. It has the talent, has the ecosystem. It has that, we talked a lot about startups, but there are hundreds of scale-up companies that are ripe again for investments or M&A, and the valuations became attractive. So it's a very good place actually to come now with full pockets of money, and it actually serves the ecosystem very well, because if you ask the companies what they need right now, obviously being on the other side of the equation, funding is required, business connection is required. We've seen, the we won't analyze it now, but in a zero interest market, driven also by the digital adaptation following COVID, we saw the rise of those startups. And of course, right now, a lot of them are having difficulties in raising money and so on. So there are a lot of opportunities really out here. And I truly believe that you will find a very sophisticated ecosystem. A term sheet in Israel looks very much like it does in the Silicon Valley. Terms are the same. The service providers are the same. There's a lot of precedents. There are hundreds of companies that have done so before you and thousands of investors that have walked through that path. I think you would find here some of the most exciting companies focusing the global challenges. Some, again, this is not me. You look on the rankings of the Newsweek, the Forbes, the Time, and you will always find many Israeli companies listed there as disrupting their markets. So the innovation is here, and there's a very strong tendency and understanding of the need to work with global partners like yourselves. Certainly at Startup Nation Central, we're always happy to assist you in that search. We're also a non-revenue organization, so I'm not selling our services because we never sell them. We'll try to be as frictionless as possible. I truly think, Israel has a lot to offer. And I truly believe that the most important thing, as I said, in innovation is collaboration. So it's by working together. Bring us your problems, bring us your unmet needs, bring us your dreams. I think you'd find here the impatient innovators which are eager to make them possible.
Thank you for that. I was excited this next one came through in terms of questions, because excited to learn your insights on talent development, next generation. But how are you engaging youth in developing innovation strategies that problem solve today's challenges and I guess tomorrow's?
Well, absolutely. I think, again, and by the way, this is not an Israel-specific phenomena or comment. I think the next generation holds a lot of the promise. First of all, it's by nature, but beyond that, they're more entrepreneurial. By the way, the motivation can be different. It's not necessarily sometimes it's because they don't want to work in a large corporate, but doesn't matter. It creates a cadre of people who are very much thinking about those challenges. They're driven by purpose. They're driven by solving those challenges that they're very concerned about. Also, the researchers in the universities today are much more prone to seeing the practical fruits of their work and not just data. So this is all to say that, really going early is a good strategy. And we try to go as early as we can, starting, with the very, very young children. And it always has to be, and this is an important point, it's not just about innovation or entrepreneurship. It's also about the skills. You really need to have that combination. One is not enough. If you just teach science, technology, then you will get great scientists, but not necessarily great entrepreneurs. If you only choose them to teach them to be entrepreneurs, then maybe you'll see that, but you will not have a technology-based ecosystem like ours. You need to have both. You really need to teach those STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics capabilities, but also enable that environment. And honestly, when I was the chief scientist of Israel, I was often asked, how do I do that? And my answer was, I don't. It's just something that exists in Israel by nature. You talked about Jewish heritage. One of the differences between the Jewish mother, and by the way, the Jewish mother could be the Jewish father equally. And let's say, let's say the mother in Singapore, another very, very strong place. And I personally sit on the National Research Innovation Council of Singapore, and I respect them very much so. The mother in Singapore will ask her child, how many good answers did you give at school? The Jewish mother will ask her child, how many good questions did you ask in school? And this is something which is very much embedded in our culture. As I've said, always challenge, always ask a question, always bring a new idea, always try to see, hey, maybe maybe this is not the right thing to do it. It's something which goes way beyond just technology innovation, and I think is a big part of the secret.
Love that in terms of like questioning and curiosity. Maybe not a fair question because I'm sure you love all of your children equally that exist in the portfolio. But based on the experience and the insight, and again, within Israeli tech development, areas or ideas that you're working on or that you've seen that you're most optimistic about?
So at Startup Mission Center, we want to serve all the 8,800 startup companies in Israel. Again, I think maybe not necessarily because I'm mentioning them because they're the fastest growing, and I'm super impressed by what I've become, is really what we see in food and agri-tech and climate technology. So again, we look at climate technology startups in Israel. There are about 900 of them. That might sound like a large or small number, depending on where you come from. But that number was 300 a couple of years. And that's my point. And I will say very, very openly, sometimes it was existing companies that have pivoted or repositioned what they did and utilizing their technology to meet those challenges. I think I look at this as really a huge economic opportunity, again, regardless of your theology with regards to the subject. I think there are amazing economic opportunities around mitigating and adapting to, climate-related challenges. And I think Israel, will find its niches. And we mentioned some of them already in our conversation that will become quite exciting. This, in addition, again, I always need to talk about cybersecurity, because if we talked about AI, you think about the cybersecurity threats that AI is bringing to our plate. Good luck to us all. That gives us a decade long of startup needed technologies just to meet the huge risks and challenges that we're going to face in that front.
I'm embarrassed to ask this one, but oh well. Climate tech. What does that exactly mean?
So climate tech is really a cluster of many different subsectors. Energy, of course, being a notable one, but also a lot of the food technologies, like alternative proteins that I mentioned, the material technologies that are relevant, as well as agriculture. So it's all the solutions. And sometimes, by the way, even smart mobility. So thinks about solutions that, again, reduce the emission or carbon capture and so on. It's really the combination of a lot of different technologies that either mitigate the challenges of climate change or global warming, or help us adapt to whatever is coming. So it really is a combination of multiple subsectors. I mentioned, I think, the most important one.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I've got time, I think, for one or two more. This has come up a couple of times, and you mentioned it, like data privacy. How do you work with and collaborate with entrepreneurs on the collecting, storing, protection of data?
Yeah, so data is again, nothing new, right? Data is the new oil. And by the way, again, speaking very openly, that poses a challenge for startups. One of the reasons the big companies became so strong and rich is their possession of data, right? The Metas, the Google, the Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and the like. So data is very, very important as such. And what we try to do is really make the full stack available to the different startups, the models, the data itself, the data center and high performance computing needed to make, train the models or inference stage and so on. So really it's a combination. It's not always us. It's sometimes public sector initiatives and it's sometimes private sector initiatives. We try to encourage a lot of collaboration. So that's one part of doing that, data partnerships, enrichment, and so on, to make sure, again, that the companies will have whatever they need to do that. With regards to the knowledge set or training, that is happening in a very, very good way, both in the relevant faculties at the Israeli research universities, but also driven by relevant military units, which, as you can guess, are using data technology, data mining for a lot of their operational needs.
I guess a selfish one for me, right, as I get a little bit older, healthcare, legacy, or longevity of life, anything exciting going on there that the region's focused on?
Definitely. So definitely one of the biggest challenges of our time, right? It's not just longevity, by the way, right? It's how do we add more good years, not just add more years, but how do we add more good years? And that has a lot of needs. And of course, another equally important is how do we do that in an affordable way that wouldn't cost all of our countries bankruptcy, and how do we make it affordable to more parts of the population? I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the US, which is a well-known fact, right? That you have first world states and third world states in the same country. I'm just talking about Israel. In Israel, I'm looking about cities which are an hour and a half drive apart. And sometimes you will see 6 years of life, of longevity difference between them. So how do we make, health available to different parts of the population? Again, it all starts with innovation. Innovation like remote care, innovation like and telehealth and the likes. Bringing really the power of digital into health will solve a lot of our problems. It will help us develop quicker and more efficiently new drugs. It will help us develop more efficient medical devices. And it will help us also, of course, create sensors and applications and all sorts of digital health solutions that will take to the point of care or even to our home the necessary solutions. So actually, Israel has, as I've said, 3 times more health tech startups than cybersecurity startups, and some very, very exciting solutions out there, from AI-driven solutions helping radiologists all around the world to detect, anomalies, tumors in CT scans, MRIs, and the likes. And if I just take that example is super needed because A, you have a huge shortage of, in this case, radiologists, but pick a medical profession, including, by the way, nurses and supporting staff. We just don't have enough people. And we need to assist those people with the power of technology. And then, of course, it just helps them make better decisions, prioritize, save lives. Well, I think we're just in the beginning of really a wave of innovation. And this is one of the unique examples, by the way, where Israel doesn't only have great innovation, it also has great implementors. So as an example and proper disclaimer, I sit on the board of Sheba Medical Center, which was repeatedly selected as one of the top 10 hospitals in the world. A lot of it is because of the innovation developed and implemented within the hospitals. So we've seen the impact of applying the power of innovation to supplying better healthcare, to our population, but truly to the world.
Well, congratulations on that. That's very cool. But back to an earlier conversation that we're having was in and around autos, auto manufacturing, and then you talked about, the lack of either the size of the workforce or the skilled workforce. So what are you doing to attract more attention from, in this instance, the major automobile manufacturers as it relates to your workforce?
Yeah, so honestly, I mean, today we don't need to do a lot, but I remember General Motors, which I mentioned, and have over 1,000 people. They were the first major automotive company to come to Israel and set up an R&D center. That was about 15 years ago. When they came, actually, they were heavily supported by the chief scientist. So we actually helped them subsidize, reduce the cost of their growing center, enable collaboration with local partners, but we made sure that a lot of it will also train the local subcontractors, the local researchers, the local startups, and so on. over the years, truly, this is, we don't need to do a lot to bring the N+1 car manufacturers because truly they're all here. And many of them have, you take Mercedes as an example. Mercedes have their global security solutions for the car headquartered in Israel. It's not the only team. The team in Israel also has other teams worldwide, but it's led from Israel. GM, many strategic projects as such, Nissan, Honda, and so on. So I think over the years, it kind of become well known. And Mobileye, by the way, was a big help of that. Mobileye is an example of an Israeli company which is leading the world and supplying, BMW and Audi and Ford and many others with ADAS, with the driver's assistance solution to ensure safety, anti-collision, and so on of cars. So maybe the lesson there is that once you create that virtuous cycle, you have that flying wheel that generates more talent, more exposure, more people are trained, and we've done a good work in attracting our workforce into high tech. I mentioned 13% of our workforce is in high tech. That's the highest in the world. That's a super high percentage when you compare it to any other country worldwide.
Great. Avi, we've got about 2 minutes, maybe 90 seconds left. So could you just end kind of where we started? Just the notion again, impatient innovation, just to help drill this home, that we can take that home, and the unreasonably optimistic. If you can just maybe your concluding comments on those two important themes.
Sure. So I think just part of being that impatient innovator, again, not necessarily a good part, but half of it is good, I guess, is an irrepressible confidence, but also an optimism. I think that is super important for any innovator out there. And Israelis truly have that optimism. That maybe it's because, like our first prime minister said, David Ben-Gurion, that in Israel, in order to be a realist, you need to believe in miracles. But really, that notion of being optimistic and jumping into action is something that my point maybe to the audience is this is not necessarily, I talked about this is not about copy and paste, but it's also not just about an inspirational page. It's about looking into your own operation and asking yourself, how can we put a dose, a spice, not necessarily changing everything, of that specific type of impatient innovators? How can we make sure that our organizations are not too risk averse, they're not too process driven, they're not too hierarchical, they're not too slow, too low defined, because the problems that we all need to solve and the opportunities that they present are just too big, to be patient about. So I would definitely recommend, either by collaborating or instilling into your own organizations, take a little bit of that impatient innovation to your own place.
Perfect. Avi, thank you. Thank you very much on behalf of the MOSAIC team, and again, the audience. Really appreciate the insights and the thought process. I know I learned a lot. I think the audience learned a lot. So thank you again for the time. All the best.
Mighty thanks.